You are about to embark on a journey into the mind of a man who lived two lives. On the surface, he was a skilled mechanic, a neighbor, someone you'd pass on the street without a second glance. But behind closed doors, his unassuming trailer housed a secret. A place designed for terror, suffering, and control. This is a story of pain, manipulation, and unthinkable cruelty. Hello there, bitch. You're probably wondering why you're here, what's going to happen to you. You may not like what I have to say, but I promise you this, you will listen, David Parker said to his victim. The words you just heard are real. They were played to his victims, bound and blindfolded, moments before their lives were changed forever. And for years, this man moved undetected, hiding his twisted reality in plain sight. Today, we uncover the chilling truth about David Parker Ray, the man who became known as the Toy Box Killer. David Parker Ray. To those who knew him casually, he was a skilled mechanic and a quiet, unassuming man who lived in the remote desert town of Elephant Butte, New Mexico. But to those who dared to look closer, he would later become known as one of the most depraved and calculated offenders in American history. He would earn the nickname the Toy Box Killer, not for his childhood, not for his upbringing, but for a small, nondescript trailer hidden in the New Mexico desert, a place he had transformed into a nightmarish chamber of unimaginable cruelty. Inside this trailer, victims were restrained, tortured, and subjected to horrors that defy comprehension. Ray meticulously planned his crimes, leaving investigators with a chilling blueprint of his sadistic fantasies. And yet, despite the evidence, there are far more questions than answers. How many victims were there? How did he evade capture for so long? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, how many remain undiscovered, lost to the desert forever? By the end of this video, you'll know the terrifying extent of Ray's crimes, the stories of the survivors who lived to tell their tales, and the horrifying legacy of a man who hid his darkness in plain sight. To truly understand the horrors of this case, we must start at the beginning. David Parker Ray was born on November 6, 1939, in Belen, New Mexico, a quiet, unassuming town nestled in the harsh landscapes of the American Southwest. From the very beginning, his life was marked by dysfunction and instability. Raised primarily by his grandfather, Ray's childhood was far from idyllic. His father, a violent alcoholic, was absent for much of his upbringing, only returning sporadically to leave a trail of physical and emotional abuse. His mother, too, was rarely present, leaving Ray and his sister to fend for themselves in an environment devoid of warmth or stability. Even as a child, there were signs of something deeply troubling. Ray began to exhibit an unusual fascination with control and pain. He would spend hours sketching images of women in restraints, intricate torture devices, and detailed mechanisms of suffering. At the time, these were dismissed as the harmless musings of a creative child. But hindsight would later paint a much darker picture. Ray's interest in mechanics only amplified his disturbing tendencies. By his teenage years, he had developed a meticulous understanding of machinery and tools, skills he would later use in ways no one could have predicted. At the same time, he began consuming violent pornography, feeding his growing obsession with dominance and control. Classmates described Ray as quiet, withdrawn, and painfully shy, often the target of bullying. But beneath his reserved exterior, there was a growing storm, a dangerous blend of isolation, resentment, and fantasy that would one day manifest in horrific ways. By the time Ray reached adulthood, the seeds of his violent tendencies had already taken root. He had perfected the art of concealment, blending into society while nurturing a secret life built on power and terror. And though he moved frequently and changed jobs often, his obsessions remained constant: tools, control, and the systematic dehumanization of others. As the years passed, Ray's fantasies grew more vivid, more elaborate. And eventually, fantasy was no longer enough. The line between imagination and reality blurred, and David Parker Ray began to put his twisted plans into motion. What came next would turn the quiet desert town of Elephant Butte into the setting for one of the most horrifying stories in American criminal history. Elephant Butte, New Mexico. A quiet desert town, known more for its vast reservoir and scenic views than for crime. But it was here, hidden in plain sight, that David Parker Ray constructed his toy box, a trailer that became a monument to terror and suffering. To an outsider, the trailer was nothing remarkable, a simple structure tucked away behind Ray's home. But inside, it was a meticulously crafted chamber of horrors, a place where his darkest fantasies became reality. The trailer was soundproofed to ensure no cries for help would escape. Its walls were lined with tools of torture, chains, whips, clamps, and devices so disturbing they defied categorization. There were shelves filled with medical instruments, restraints hanging from the ceiling, and photographs documenting acts too horrific to describe. In the center of the room stood a gynecological chair, modified with restraints, facing a large mirror, designed to force his victims to witness their own suffering. Every detail of the toy box was designed with purpose. Ray was not impulsive. He was deliberate, calculating. There were written instructions on the walls, a step-by-step guide for how to handle his victims, ensuring no detail was left to chance. Ray wasn't just content with physical control. He sought total domination, breaking his victims not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. To achieve this, he recorded an audio tape, a prelude to the horrors that awaited. This tape, played to his victims as they lay bound and helpless, served as both a warning and a declaration of his power. "You're here because I want you here. You will be my slave. I will control your mind and body. If you behave, you might survive. If you don't, well, let's just say that will be your mistake, not mine." For years, this trailer was the epicenter of Ray's atrocities. And yet, it remained hidden, an ordinary trailer in an ordinary town, concealing crimes that would later horrify the nation. But David Parker Ray didn't act alone. To fully understand the extent of his crimes, we must examine the victims he targeted, the accomplices who aided him, and the survivors who escaped to tell their stories. David Parker Ray's victims were often women who lived on the fringes of society, those whose disappearances might not draw immediate attention. Some were sex workers. Others were travelers, passing through the remote New Mexico desert. And for many, their names remain unknown, their stories lost to the sands of Elephant Butte. The true number of Ray's victims is unknown. While only 3 survivors were ever identified, law enforcement suspects that dozens more fell prey to his sadistic fantasies. Many of these women were never reported missing, leaving their fates shrouded in mystery. Ray kept detailed records of his crimes, including photographs and videotapes. These relics offered chilling glimpses into the torment he inflicted but failed to provide clear answers about his victims' identities. Ray didn't act alone. Cindy Hendy, his girlfriend at the time, played a key role in luring victims to his toy box. She helped incapacitate them, using drugs and manipulation to ensure they couldn't resist. Hendy's involvement made her complicit in Ray's atrocities and added another layer of betrayal to the victims' stories. But not every victim met the same fate. Against all odds, some survived. And it was their bravery that eventually brought David Parker Ray's reign of terror to an end. Cynthia Vigil was one of those survivors. In March 1999, she was held captive in the toy box for 3 harrowing days. Bound, beaten, and subjected to unspeakable torture, Vigil managed to do what so many could not: escape. Cynthia's escape was nothing short of miraculous. Seizing an opportune moment when Ray and Hendy left her unattended, she broke free of her restraints, fought off Hendy, and fled, naked, bruised, and terrified, into the streets of Elephant Butte. Her desperate cries for help led to a call to the police, finally unmasking the horrors hidden in Ray's trailer. Cynthia's courage, along with the testimony of 2 other survivors, Angie Montano and Kelly Garrett, became the cornerstone of the case against David Parker Ray. Their stories were harrowing but necessary, shining a light on the unimaginable evil that had remained hidden for so long. But even with these accounts, the question remains, how many others never had the chance to escape? How many voices were silenced forever within the walls of the toy box? Cynthia Vigil's escape triggered an immediate and intense investigation. The police, now aware of David Parker Ray's monstrous activities, were faced with an overwhelming task, unraveling decades of crimes concealed within the desolate confines of Elephant Butte. What they found inside the toy box left even the most seasoned officers horrified. The trailer wasn't just a crime scene, it was a meticulously organized torture chamber, outfitted with tools and devices designed for maximum pain and psychological torment. Among the evidence were videotapes of victims, journals detailing Ray's fantasies and methods, and photographs documenting his atrocities. Each piece painted a picture of a man who saw his victims not as people, but as objects to be controlled and broken. This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever encountered. The level of planning and depravity is unlike anything we've seen before. One of the most chilling discoveries was Ray's audio recording, the same tape he played to his victims when they first entered the toy box. This recording, filled with detailed instructions and threats, gave investigators a glimpse into the twisted mind of a man who reveled in power and control. "You are now my property. You have no rights, no freedom, and no hope. The only thing that matters is what I want, and you will obey." But the evidence wasn't limited to the trailer. Investigators found chains and restraints in Ray's home, as well as a map with locations marked across the desert, locations that led police to suspect he had disposed of bodies in remote areas of New Mexico. Search efforts began immediately, but the vastness of the desert posed a significant challenge. Despite cadaver dogs and advanced equipment, no human remains were ever definitively linked to Ray's crimes. For the families of missing persons, this lack of closure was devastating. Photos of missing women fade in and out, accompanied by their names and dates of disappearance. Ray's journals suggested he had taken the lives of over 60 women, yet authorities could only identify a handful of survivors and no confirmed bodies. The question lingered, how many victims were there, and where were they buried? In their search for answers, police turned to Cindy Hendy. During her interrogation, she admitted to assisting Ray and claimed he had disposed of bodies in lakes and remote desert locations. However, her information was inconsistent, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. Despite the gaps in evidence, the sheer weight of survivor testimonies and the physical evidence found in the toy box led to Ray's arrest and subsequent trial. The prosecution now faced the daunting task of presenting the horrors of the toy box to a courtroom unprepared for the depths of Ray's depravity. His expression is cold, unmoved by the proceedings around him. David Parker Ray's trial was a pivotal moment, a chance to hold one of America's most dangerous criminals accountable for his atrocities. But building a case against him was no easy task. With no confirmed bodies and only the survivors' harrowing testimonies, prosecutors faced an uphill battle. Ray was charged with numerous counts of kidnapping, sexual assault, and torture. The prosecution's strategy relied heavily on the bravery of three women, Cynthia Vigil, Kelly Garrett, and Angie Montano. Their testimonies detailed unimaginable abuse, painting a vivid picture of Ray's calculated cruelty. Kelly Garrett, another survivor, shared her equally horrifying experience. Abducted in 1996, Garrett was drugged and tortured in the toy box before being abandoned near her home. For years, she had no memory of the ordeal, believing it to be a nightmare, until investigators showed her evidence confirming it was real. The defense attempted to discredit the survivors, questioning their memories and motivations. But the mountain of physical evidence, the torture devices, the audio tapes, the journals, corroborated their accounts, leaving little doubt about Ray's guilt. In a case filled with horrifying details, the prosecution's closing argument resonated deeply. David Parker Ray used his toy box to strip away every shred of humanity from his victims. We owe it to them to ensure he never has the chance to do it again. After a grueling trial, David Parker Ray was convicted and sentenced to 224 years in prison. It was a moment of justice for the survivors, though it could never erase the pain they endured. David Parker Ray died in prison in 2002, just 3 years after his conviction. He took many of his secrets with him, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and grieving families. To this day, no bodies have been recovered, and the full extent of his crimes remains a chilling mystery. For the survivors, life after Ray has been a journey of resilience. Cynthia Vigil has dedicated her life to helping other survivors of abuse, turning her trauma into a beacon of hope. Kelly Garrett continues to advocate for victims' rights, her story a testament to the strength it takes to confront unimaginable pain. But for the families of the missing, the scars remain fresh. Many still hold out hope that one day, their loved ones will be found and given the dignity of a proper farewell. The desert, vast and unyielding, holds its secrets tightly, reminders of the lives that may have been lost. David Parker Ray's case has left a lasting mark on the world of criminal justice and victim advocacy. It serves as a grim reminder of the monsters that can hide in plain sight and the resilience of those who refuse to let their stories be silenced. In the end, the Toy Box Killer's legacy is not just one of horror but of courage, of survivors who stood against him, of investigators who sought the truth, and of communities that came together to confront unspeakable evil. It is a legacy that reminds us to always listen, always question, and never forget. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think the full extent of David Parker Ray's crimes will ever be uncovered? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a like and share it with others who are passionate about true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications